I find it really fascinating how developer advocacy or DevRel, developer relations, I feel like there's so many different terms for it, and they all are slightly different, I guess, but how it is so different across the industry and by company. Each time I make a switch in my career, I do try to go somewhere where it is a little bit uncomfortable and there's a lot of new material where I can just keep learning. People look to developer advocates to kind of learn what's going on with the product, what's the latest in the industry. You kind of have to be a learner to be successful in this role.
Hi, I'm Liz Fong-Jones.
And I'm Charity Majors.
And you're listening to Observability Cast, or o11ycast for short, a fortnightly series about the art and science of making production systems observable, easy to maintain, and appropriately reliable.
o11ycast is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest in this show, or if you have a specific topic you'd like us to dive into, you can reach us on Twitter at o11ycast.
The way that we view observability at Chronosphere is all about the mission is being how quickly can you remediate a problem. In order to do that, you kind of have to understand a lot of what's going on. And the way that the pillars are structured are more like inputs to that problem, like the things you can use to figure out what's going on to help remediate your problem faster. But the way we were thinking about it is it should be more output focused. So that's kind of why we shifted more to the phases versus just the three pillars. And our phases are know, triage, and understand.
And I love that focus, right? Because you should be able to fix the problem even before you necessarily fully understand it, right? Otherwise you get rabbit holed and you're not actually solving the problem for your users.
Right, exactly. And sometimes, you have to know the problem. So you have to, know that something's not working as it should or know that something's wrong. And then triage, you can try to remediate during the triage portion or triage phase, but not until you kind of, resolve the problem initially are you able to then go and take the time to understand and really root cause, why did this happen, and try to prevent it from happening in the future. And you can do all these things with your telemetry data, so your logs, metrics, and traces, but if you don't look at it from the outcomes perspective, just looking at it from the inputs perspective might not be enough to get you where you need to go.
Yeah, there's this thing that we've been talking about where, we agree with you, this idea of outcome-based observability, because otherwise you're collecting signals like you're collecting Pokemon, but they're not actually doing you any good.
Yeah, so that's kind of like how we view the things, and being able to have a solution or kind of a platform where you can use all those, the inputs like the three pillars to do the remediation is going to be important, but it's making sure you have, everything that you need, the resources you need to be able to utilize them in an effective way and get the outcomes you need to run an effective observability function.
Excellent. So now would be a good time for you to introduce yourself.
Okay, great. So my name is Gibbs Cullen. I am a developer advocate with Chronosphere, where we are building a cloud-native observability platform. And I have been with Chronosphere for almost 2 years now. And then before that, I was over at Amazon for about 5.5 years, mostly doing product management.
That's interesting that you talked about this idea of coming to developer advocacy, not necessarily from an engineering perspective, but I almost think about product management as an engineering function.
Yeah, it can vary for sure. I think I had some different types of product management experience at Amazon where I was much more like product focused and more on the business side and like, what is this product going to look like and how are our customers going to interact with it? So I guess that can both be on engineering kind of deals with similar issues. But I think, probably the way that you are thinking about it and more traditionally is product management is seen as kind of being the left-hand man of or woman of the engineering team to try to kind of develop these products and get them out there and hopefully, solve problems for customers, whether they're internal or external.
That definitely is a helpful perspective to have because often engineers tend to focus in on like the how rather than the why. So it's really helpful to, understand how are people going to use this.
Yeah, definitely. And so, I think all of that kind of product management experience really gave me a lot of, because I didn't really know what a developer advocate really was prior to Chronosphere. I know we have some like developer relations and developer advocates within Amazon, more so in like AWS, but it was all, what appealed to me about that role is where it was just like, it was more focused on the how and also the why. And like, it was all about like helping promote your product more so, and trying to get a better understanding of what customers were looking for, or your users were looking for, and trying to articulate that back to like build a better product.
Yeah, it feels like that's something that every company that works in developer tooling absolutely should have, but that not everyone does have developer advocacy, or at least a robust developer advocacy department.
It definitely varies. I mean, I'm the only developer advocate at Chronosphere, for example. I mean,
although you're hiring though, right?
We are hiring. We are hiring. So that's good. We definitely need to keep building this function out, because I think it is a very valuable function, and there's many different components of being a developer advocate. And I think it's really hard to like have someone that focuses across the board.
Right. We were preparing for this, and Chronosphere has recently announced tracing, but your bread and butter has been metrics for the past couple of years, and that's kind of...
Yeah, so exactly. And so I think, right, having more people to kind of focus more in on these different lanes of the company will be important. It's definitely a really interesting space, though, and it is. I find it really fascinating how developer advocacy, or DevRel, developer relations, I feel like there's so many different terms for it, and they all are slightly different, I guess, but how it is so different across the industry and by company. So it's been an interesting space to be in.
Speaking of which, what caused you to come to Chronosphere, to come into the observability field? As you were saying, you were working like more on a product team at Amazon that was not necessarily AWS or DevTools.
So yeah, I think I was at Amazon for 5.5 years, and during my time there, I went progressively more to like smaller and smaller teams and like more earlier stage products. I mean, all under the umbrella of Amazon, of course. But my last role at Amazon was on this team within AWS that launched this new program called Data Lab. And it felt like a startup, because I was one of the first product managers. It was a really small team, and kind of got to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of different things. And so that really whet my appetite to want to join a startup outside of the Amazon umbrella, where the stakes are a little bit higher, and this everyone, I feel like it has to really come together on that common vision. So yeah, that's kind of what led me to go to a startup, especially early stage startup like Chronosphere. And yeah, with each time I make a switch in my career, I do try to go somewhere where it is a little bit uncomfortable and there's a lot of new material where I can just keep learning. Eventually I'm going to have to like stop doing that and like get to a point where I can become a little bit more specialized and more of an expert, which I think observability and as a whole is a space that I think I could probably try to do that, because there's just so much material.
And we're so early on. But like, I think that's part of what's great about being a dev advocate, right? Like, is we get paid to professionally be learners all the time and to put ourselves in the shoes of people who are brand new.
Yeah. And if you don't, then you're going to not be as relevant. People look to developer advocates to kind of learn what's going on with the product, what's the latest in the industry, like get the opinions. It kind of sets the tone. And so if you're not, I know you do a great job at this because you're always advocating, or open source or OTel or Honeycomb. But yeah, you kind of have to be a learner to be successful in this role.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I like coming in and building like demo apps and like seeing how does this actually work? What are the roadblocks? How do we fix it? And I think in that aspect, it's been a exciting couple of years for OpenTelemetry. I'm glad we're kind of finally towards the end of the release candidate 1.0 road, at least for tracing. But now we have to conquer metrics, and now after that we have to do logging, and after that we have to do continuous profiling.
Never ends.
Yes, the pillars are bullshit as far as like collecting them all, but no, they all provide some amount of value. So unlocking that value for OpenTelemetry ecosystem customers is important.
Exactly. I think like having them together is going to provide more value than having them all just be independent. So that definitely makes sense. But yeah, never ending amount of work to do.
So speaking of this idea of like discovering things as we go along, kind of to what extent do you wind up dog fooding things at Chronosphere? Like kind of are you involved in that kind of process of experimenting with the tooling and seeing like where it works, where it doesn't work? Like what have you learned?
We definitely dog food all of our products, and we use Chronosphere for our own monitoring and observability needs and purposes. And so I get excited by that because if we're our own customer, that means that we're going to want a product that's, as efficient and cost effective and all these other things that, our customers might want. So that kind of keeps us honest, I guess, with what we are really providing and making sure we're continually making a better product. So I personally don't do a lot of the testing of products and while they're being developed. Like once they are developed, I will definitely play around with them. But I know like our engineering teams are very involved with dog fooding during development. And then also like once we have new products rolled out, we continue to use them.
Yeah, it's one of the fun things that we've done, at least with regard to Honeycomb, is treating our dog food environment as user acceptance testing, right? It's the first to get the new release. If it breaks, we'll find out about it pretty quickly. And that way we get a chance to, give it one last test before it goes and reaches all of our customers.
Yeah, and that's really important because otherwise you're going to be relying on your customers to kind of give you all this feedback. And sometimes, you might not get everything that you need out of that kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, there are definitely a couple of traps with that though, because right, like if you're an expert in the product, you're not going to necessarily see things that someone who is a non-expert is going to notice.
Yeah, that's true. Especially in like observability and products like Honeycomb and Chronosphere. We have engineers that a lot of people came from observability or kind of had an understanding of monitoring and metrics beforehand. And that's not the case for a lot of our customers where a lot of engineers there are still kind of new to the space.
Right. It's that exciting thing where people are embracing this journey of production ownership, right? And that means you have to learn all of these tools that previously other people were doing for you.
Right, exactly. But that kind of gets to your point of like, sometimes if you are too close to the problem and if you are an expert, like you might not see all the different angles. So I think, we definitely have to be aware of that, especially given that we have our engineering team is probably not the most representative of like the overarching engineers that are working in observability across all these different companies that are adopting these cloud native monitoring or, observability solutions. So, but yeah, I think we do a good job of testing ourselves and then always looking for, feedback from customers or users of our products.
Speaking of cloud native, you mentioned that, you are conceptualizing Chronosphere as this cloud native observability solution. What does it mean to you kind of for a observability solution to be cloud native? I know that the CNCF has tagged observability. How do these things relate to each other?
I think for us, like the shift to cloud native, it's still ongoing and I feel like it came into conception not even that many years ago, but it's kind of forced companies to kind of reevaluate how they manage their infrastructures and everything. Because I think the shift going from kind of more VM-based architecture infrastructure to kind of more application or microservices-based, like container-based architectures is just like driving an explosion in metrics where, people we talk to they're seeing 10 to 15 times more metrics than they used to in their old like VM-based.
Right, exactly. Like the containers are ephemeral. The tags are constantly going to be changing. Therefore, yeah, that definitely is a large architectural difference.
Yes.
In the tracing world, it's been interesting. We've been talking about this idea that in theory, your application should be agnostic to where it's running. And therefore, the difference as far as the tracing signal is concerned is simply that you have an encouragement to proliferate more microservices that you need to understand better, but it's not necessarily a change to the format the data comes in. Whereas it sounds like in metrics, right, like, you have all of these containers that are being started up and shut down, and you only get metrics for a certain period of time from any one container.
Yeah, I think that's like been a big driver in creating these solutions like Chronosphere that where we call ourselves more cloud native, is because I think the goal is to be able to come up with a solution that can accommodate this level of scale and like the increase in metrics that we're seeing across the board.
Yeah, so I guess there's the data volume challenge. Kind of, what about the problems of trying to correlate behavior between applications that are now kind of jumping around between different hosts?
That's an interesting problem because I feel like if you do have applications kind of jumping around various hosts, you might be having to jump between different dashboards or views to kind of get that single pane of glass or that overview of what's happening across all of your hosts. Yeah, so I think having a solution where you can kind of have everything in one place, that's going to be really important because like that problem is going to continue on and like you're going to have the complexity is just going to get greater and greater and greater. So I think as long as you can maintain a single point of view of everything or overview of what's going on, then that'll be important. So I think like at Chronosphere, I know we're trying to really make it so that everything's kind of integrated really tightly, like traces, metric data, all like integrated really tightly. So you don't have to switch between different, panes or windows to kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, that kind of cognitive switching cost of switching tools like per signal is just way too high. I think the other interesting thing that you said that I really liked was the idea of, you shouldn't need to care which container something is running in, right? Like that you should have this overall view, and that the older ways that we're kind of focused on per VM views just don't work when you're more interested in the application itself.
Right. And then you can then have the ability with traces or whatever telemetry data you want to go and deep dive and like look at, VM or container, individual containers. But I think that shouldn't be the first step. That should be like, part of the triage or kind of remediation.
Right, exactly. The joke that I tend to make is you wouldn't look at a tree trunk with binoculars. That just doesn't make sense, right? Like you want to start zoomed in at the right level and then be able to zoom in or out from there.
Right. No, of course. And it sounds like really obvious, but I think
people have all these old tools and they're like, I just want to use this one tool. And it's like, does it really make sense to continue using that same tool, like when applying to all the problems?
Right. Yeah, no, I know. Exactly. And I think as data continues to grow and cardinality continues to grow, and like maybe people that may be holding on to some of these older legacy tools may start having to be forced to kind of think about other ways of managing their data.
Yeah. Speaking of cardinality and kind of data storage engines, I know that Chronosphere is built on M3, which is open source. Kind of, how has that been to kind of be based upon a fully open source product? Like, kind of, how does that relationship play out? Because, like, we've seen these weird things with, like, Elastic deciding that you're going to kind of fork and take things closed source or, like, source available. What's that dynamic been like for you in the kind of M3 and the broader M3 community?
I find it really exciting to be kind of based on a fully open source product. I think, back at Uber, they built M3 internally to kind of meet Uber's and their own like metrics monitoring use cases. And they could have very easily just said like, okay, we're just going to do this just for Uber. But they decided from day one to open source the project. So it's been open source from day one. And I think that's really cool because like, while all these like standardizations are great, more open protocols and everything, I think without having companies like Uber build these like new custom solutions can maybe limit the innovation that we continue to see in the space. And the fact that they decided to open source it, I think is really, there's other solutions that are similar, like, Cortex and Thanos, all were kind of created in a similar vein. And I think without having that drive to be open source from day one, we wouldn't be where we are now in terms of having all these different solutions continuing to innovate.
Right. It's the competition and also being able to look at what the other project is doing and be able to kind of incorporate features. That's very handy. I was part of Google, not when the Bigtable page was originally released, but I was working on Bigtable for a very long time. And it was very interesting to see that HBase came along because of Bigtable, right? That people went and implemented Hadoop, implemented HBase. And then when we released Cloud Bigtable, we had to re-implement the HBase protocol and map it onto Bigtable because we didn't release Bigtable as open source in the first place, right?
Right.
So kind of that transition from, the data platform is our secret sauce to like the data platform is open, right? Like I think that that's been a huge strategic shift to the way that large companies see things now.
Yeah, exactly. And things are going to always be changing and continue to change. And so like making sure you're continuing to be adaptable and being consistent or compatible with these like open standards is going to make any sort of changes a lot easier. And so that's something that we've like, held strong to, is just making sure that we are kind of keeping consistent and compatible with all these standards so that our customers don't have to go through those pain points that you may experience, for more closed standards.
Right, exactly. And that makes it seamless for someone to move from self-hosting M3 to using you or using open metrics to send data to, both Prometheus and to you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing where at Honeycomb we kind of decided, actually we're deprecating or like moving to maintenance mode our previous telemetry ingest SDKs because open telemetry exists now. There's no reason not to kind of use the common shared technology.
Right.
What's your experience been working with tag observability at the CNCF, formerly SIG Observability?
Yeah. So I've started kind of regularly attending and participating in the tag meetings, maybe beginning of this year. And it's been an interesting experience kind of sitting in and now getting to a point where I feel like I'm participating a bit more. One of the chairs, Matt Young, he really has a lot of these ideas for ways to kind of grow engagement with the tag. So I'm kind of helping out a little bit with that. And a lot of these efforts are going to be eventually to kind of try to recruit people of different backgrounds and of different roles and not of different interactions with observability, because right now I think a lot of people I've talked to want to get more involved with the tag and like really like what they're doing and want to be more involved with open source. But I think it's a little bit hard to get yourself in there since most of the people that are running or kind of highly involved with the tag, are experts in the field and
maybe work at vendors or work at kind of companies who have done this a long time.
Yeah, they're mostly engineers. We don't have many end users, don't have many people that are not engineers. So I think I would love to see, and I think the tag is working to try to do initiatives to try to recruit more people that kind of can have a more representative voice and perspective of what's going on across these CNCF observability projects as a whole, and not just from the perspectives of these like vendors.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see the balance between the SIG instrumentation in Kubernetes and then the overall tag for the CNCF, as well as the OpenTelemetry project. There are so many interesting efforts going on there, and I'm glad to see that all of us are kind of focusing on expanding these set of voices that are represented at the table.
Exactly. And I think, part of me also like feels like, there's so much mind share to be kind of like spread across these groups. And I know that they are all their own thing and kind of siloed, but I've always been curious to see if there was like ways to kind of get these groups together and like maybe collaborate, because a lot of the groups do have similar goals and missions. So I'm still new to all of it a little, like for the most part, but I think that would be an interesting thing to see in the future if that would be at all possible.
Awesome. So kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk about is, so both Honeycomb and Grafana and Chronosphere have announced like fairly large funding rounds in the past couple of months. What does this mean for our space?
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy.
And congratulations, by the way.
Yeah, well, congratulations to you as well. Very exciting. And it is kind of crazy to see all of this funding come together in this space, like in such a short amount of time. But I think it really just goes to show that there is a really pressing need for observability and these types of solutions in the market. And I think this, increased amount of funding will allow, at least I know at Chronosphere, like it's going to allow us to continue our efforts to kind of really build out more of like a platform for our customers or users to really come and like be able to deploy all the 3 phases that we discussed earlier in one place. And so by having this additional funding, I think we're going to see that across the board, just like, having these solutions become more robust and become better solutions for, small companies or big companies. I think we'll start seeing a lot more come out of these companies with the additional resources and funding.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing where all of this investment in this space means that we can develop things that are kind of both individual to our companies as well as things that kind of raise the tide for everyone and help everyone get better at this.
Right, exactly.
It's going to be definitely a very interesting time, but like I'm glad that we're still in this phase where we can contribute to these common solutions and kind of raise awareness of the outcome-based observability rather than kind of fighting over the definition of observability.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, the other thing that I think is really cool about this is it kind of validates, I don't know if you've seen the Stripe Developer Coefficient Survey from a couple of years ago.
I don't think I have.
But Stripe basically interviewed a bunch of engineering teams, and they basically said, we're spending 17 hours out of every 40 hours on kind of break-fix work. And it's like, really? You're like, that's 45% of your week. That's just gone like that, right? Like, we all deserve so much better than that, right?
Yeah.
And observability, I think, is this huge piece of it that is finally getting kind of invested in enough that we can make it table stakes for everyone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, because it's not sustainable to have an operation where your developer headcount growth and your metrics growth are going literally together. So I think, these solutions and platforms like Honeycomb and Chronosphere eventually, I feel like they're going to get more robust and more powerful where these companies can rely on them more and not have to put people behind the problem necessarily.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That was a delightful conversation that I enjoyed, and I hope you did too. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you have a specific topic you'd like us to dive into, you can reach us on Twitter at o11ycast.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders. Hope to see you next time.